ideas from a cooperative project for acquiring skills essential to learning.
Welcome to another episode of the Security Chipmunks podcast, where we keep chipping away at it. I'm your host, Edna Johnson, and today I'm joined with Jerry Bell.
Thank you for having me, Edna. It's really a pleasure to be here and an honor. And thank you to everybody who is interested in listening to me talk. So it's great to be here. And I was really tickled when you invited me here. So thank you again.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm so glad to have you on the episode and having you here on the podcast. I've been following you on TikTok, and then I learned about your own podcast. So it's been really exciting to learn about your background and your journey in cybersecurity, and it's really impressive, actually. So I appreciate you jumping on with us.
Oh, I've been lucky for a very long time, I guess is the way I would say it.
Yeah. So one thing that I learned about you, and I was like super excited to hear that, is that you run the Fediverse server InfoSec Exchange.
I do. I started that server back in 2017. So we actually just passed our 8th birthday, and it's been kind of a wild ride after Twitter kind of imploded back in 2022. There was a mass exodus from that platform over to the Fediverse, and prior to that, it had been 50 to 100 people, and kind of within the span of a month, it went from 100 people to about 50,000, and that was a really exciting time. But I was really happy to be able to contribute, to helping the community kind of find find an alternate landing place.
Yeah, I mean that it's so impressive, because I remember that time when InfoSec Twitter moved from Twitter to your server, InfoSec Exchange, and it's a great community there, and I know that you have a lot of people that have joined it in the last few years, so it's pretty cool. So has there been some growing pains going through that, or?
Early on, there certainly was. Obviously, the capacity to run that many concurrent people is not cheap.
Yeah,
and so it was. There was a lot of kind of juggling of systems and trying to keep up with with the demand while not breaking the bank. Because I funded it personally for a long time, but eventually I crossed the threshold where donations were paying for it. Now I've kind of gotten I would say a happy, consistent and stable capacity. Although, recently the amount of people has kind of been waning, and I would say very recently is starting to go back up. So it's a little bit inconsistent, but has been quite quite interesting to be part of.
yeah, that's really neat. So as far as the community, I know that there's a lot of InfoSec people on the InfoSec Exchange. So I know that there's been some updates with the tweets, or not the tweets, the toots. Sorry, the quote toots and all that. So moderation wise, has it been going pretty well?
There's anytime you have a bunch of people in kind of the same room together, you're going to have some issues, and
yeah,
it's really no exception. I'm not going to say it hasn't been a problem. I would say the technical aspects, while they've been a challenge, really don't hold a candle to the complexities of moderating a community that large. You don't want to be. Well, let me say it differently. You want to enable people to express themselves and communicate freely, but not everybody has the same idea of what that means.
Yeah.
And so it's been that, I will say, has been probably the largest aspect of the largest challenge of running that community for sure.
Hmm. Nice. So I also learned that you host a podcast, the Defensive Security Podcast, and you have for many years. So tell me about the podcast and like what got you started in podcasting.
So a long time ago, in a universe far, far away, um, I was more on a CIO trajectory. I was with a company called Internet Security Systems, from the late '90s until the mid 2000s. Sometime in the mid 2000s, our company got bought by IBM, and an interesting thing happens. IBM doesn't really need its own IT, a new IT function or a new CIO, and so I kind of got labeled the security guy, and so even though that really wasn't what I had been focusing on, security was part of my responsibility set there, but it kind of morphed into more of my identity at IBM. And I, at the same time, was getting into listening to podcasts, and also at the same time, we started to see a really large change in awareness of more advanced threats. So, there was the
Hmm.
Aurora attack with Google. Mandiant had just released its APT1 report, and there was just this freight train of really complex attacks. And at the same time, I was kind of taking on more responsibility for protecting customers at my employer, and things like incident response and whatnot. And I found it odd at the time. There really weren't any what I'll call corporate security podcasts. There was like Information Security Daily, which was cool, but it was, I would call it the podcast, the security podcast equivalent of like the morning radio zoo. It
Hmm.
was it was fun, but it really wasn't all that informative. And then you had things like Security Now, which was very consumer oriented. And so I was a little disappointed that there was this gap in, on the one hand, you had a lot of stuff coming out, a lot of change happening in the industry, and nobody was talking about it. And so it took me probably a year to get it started. And the most complicated part was finding the right music.
Okay, yeah,
And
that makes sense.
and,
Like finding music for podcast is hard.
and then that was my excuse for a long time. But then I got it off the ground, and it has been fun. That was back in, I think I started in 2011, 2012, that time frame, and
Wow.
I took some time off. I around 2020 I got a new job, and my co-host fell ill about the same time, and we took a couple years off. And about a year ago we restarted it, so it's been going again.
Okay, wonderful. That's really good to hear. Yeah, I understand with the taking a break from podcasts because I've done the same with this one. Um, Life happens. So, but that's good that you're continuing it. Um, so with hosting a podcast, have you found that like you're does that help you in your career, like making connections and meeting new people? Do you feel like?
It certainly has. I would say it really helped elevate me to the position that I ultimately got to. My most recent assignment was as the CISO for IBM Cloud,
Oh
which was a
wow.
just a huge environment. And I was in that role for about 4 years and left, and I have been unemployed now for about a year, unemployed on my own, by my own choice. But I will say the one thing that is super important, and I suspect a lot of people are, especially those who are just coming into the market right now, are probably feeling a lot of frustration and dismay maybe about the job market. And things like podcasts really help differentiate you. In my experience, it has always been a benefit if people know who you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
If obviously helps if it's for a good reason. um, but
Yeah.
it has. I would say it has really added to my my professional success for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's excellent. And it also gets you used to speaking to people from different walks of life too, right?
Yeah, for sure. We haven't done a ton of interviews. A lot. It's mostly back and forth between my co-host and I. We did start a second show where we do interview people. That's kind of on hiatus at the moment.
Okay.
But yeah, and I will say that was another reason that I started this. I am probably about the most awkward person you can imagine, socially.
Yeah.
So it has also been a big help for that.
Yeah. I think that's very true for a lot of people in tech, having that awkwardness. Um, it just comes with having nerdy interests, I think.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So you mentioned the role you had at IBM was cloud security. Um, so that's so interesting. What do you think are like the most challenging things in cloud security today?
The complexity and unknowingly making mistakes that get bit. So, if you look back in time, one of the most significant challenges, which by the way is still a challenge even today, are unsecured S3 buckets.
Mhm.
It is such an easy mistake to make. Now, I think that the providers are starting to turn around, to come around and make things more secure by default, but you have a huge amount of stuff that's already out there, to the point where there's actually on our Mastodon instance there's an account called the Bucket Challenge, and their whole thing is trying to identify through some kind of clever means unsecured buckets that contain sensitive data, and then they try to like they're not doing it for fame or money or to be nefarious, but they're actually like trying to get to the owners to get that turned off, which has been a big problem. So I would say that's probably the most significant one. And then beyond that, it's really related to the complexities around IAM.
Mhm.
And each provider is a little nuanced take on that. But that is, I would say, those are the kind of the two biggest issues. Now, I will say, as the CISO of a cloud provider, the, I now I've been out for a year, so I'm always optimistic that things continue to get better. One of the big problems we had was companies who thought that, or had some deep misunderstanding of what you get when you buy when you put your stuff in cloud. And so I had an unfortunate number of instances where customers didn't realize that they were responsible for patching their own, the virtual servers they set up in the environment, and then something bad happens, and they're left wondering, well, what happened? And so I don't know if that's, again, I don't know how deep of a and broad of a problem that still is, but there's been, at least in my experience, there's been some disconnects in who's responsible for what.
Yeah. That kind of reminds me of like the OS top 10 where you keep seeing the same problems.
Mm-hmm.
Every time they publish a new one, it's like 7 of them are the same over and over and over again because it just keeps being the same problem for like a decade later. Um, so yeah, I definitely understand how that can continue, even though you're trying to do better. And I've noticed in environments, misconfigurations happen a lot. So that is definitely something to look out for. But it's good to be reminded of it and continue talking about it so people can try to do better and make their environment safer. So,
Absolutely.
very nice. So your background, how did you get into IT? What was your start?
So I actually went a long time ago,
Mm-hmm.
early 90s. I went to college for electrical engineering and basically couldn't afford to keep going. And so I started working at a small family owned factory and as a maintenance person of all things. And, I had a pretty big aptitude for all things mechanical and electrical, and quickly moved into kind of project engineering where I was designing, material handling equipment and whatnot. Again, this is like a 150 or 200 person company. And again, this, keep in mind the context, right? This was like 1993 and
Mm-hmm.
PCs were not yet kind of common in business settings. And so the IT person, they had a little mini Unix computer. The IT person was the owner's son, and the owner was in the process of retiring and had to replace himself, and
Okay.
as the IT person. And so I guess at some point expressed an interest in computers, and so I took over maintenance of their legacy system, and then I moved them to PCs, and that was uh, super exciting. I learned a ton because I was the application developer. I was the person that ran the backups. I was the person that pulled the cables and built the PCs and everything. So I learned an absolute ton, but it was more kind of a security generalist type position. And then I went to work for a little internet service provider in Michigan, who focused on commercial customers. So they were like T1, like not residential stuff. And I went there to be a Unix administrator and quickly rose up the ranks. IBM bought, ISS Internet Security Systems bought that company, and I probably within the span of 2 years, I was the director of IT at ISS, and
Wow.
and then a couple of years later, IBM came along. So it has been. I guess I would say, I can't never not remember being interested in computers. Like the first one I had was a VIC-20 when I was probably like 10 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's just been in my blood for decades.
Okay, great. Well, that's awesome. So photography. I'm noticing the picture behind you, and it's reminding me of you. You have a lot of great photos that you take, and you've shown your work on TikTok and your flowers and everything. So what got you into that, and what's your favorite camera?
Oh goodness. Um, I have had on and off love affairs with photography for quite some time. We bought a film camera when we first had kids. This was a long time ago. My kids are all married and whatnot now, but um, I got big into it in about 2010, and I just didn't have time and interest to keep it going. And then I would say about 4 years ago, the bug bit me again. And I really like taking pictures of flowers. Like I'm an imposter in the photography community on TikTok because you have a lot of photographers who take portraits and wedding, they shoot weddings and that sort of thing. And I can't take a picture of a person to save my life, but I love taking pictures of orchids, of daisies, of we have a place at the beach down in Florida, and I take sunset shots and whatnot. So that's really my jam. My favorite camera is right now I have a Nikon Z9, which is it's a super big mirrorless. It's very large and because it's so big, I can hold it easy in my hands.
Very nice. That's so cool. Yeah, your photos are just amazing. I know you're saying you're not as great as some other people, but like I've seen your pictures; they're incredible. So
Thank you.
you do, yeah, absolutely. So final question: what is advice that you think people need to hear in cybersecurity today, like that are starting their careers? What's something you would like to share with the listeners here?
So I guess a couple things. Cybersecurity is a broad field. It's almost as broad as IT itself. And so I, as someone who has a fairly large social media presence, I have lots of people asking me like, how do I get in? How do I advance and whatnot? So this is a common question, and it has gotten a lot more complicated in recent times with AI. I think kind of throttling the demand for junior people or entry level people, but they're still there, right? There still are jobs. It's just it's not as plentiful as we've seen. Budgets for security organizations is for the first time really starting to slow down, and in some respects starting to shrink. But for people, I would say for people who are either just getting into it or looking to advance, my advice number one is networking, and I'll clarify, like, networking from a human side is super important in terms of getting jobs. Doing the resume battle is not very productive. It's a difficult way to land a job. If you're able to find contacts that can help you, get your first role, that's going to be your the most successful way forward. I think networking in terms of the technology is also a super important skill set for any type of person. I think it's important for any person in IT, but in particular for security. And I say that regardless of role, whether you're a GRC person or a pen tester or an executive, right? It doesn't really matter. Having a deep understanding of networking is really, really important. And then the third thing is, like I said before, finding a way to differentiate yourself. And whether that's by, starting a podcast, writing a blog, starting a TikTok channel, or doing something that makes you a recognizable name, that people know who you are when their resume lands on, or your resume lands on their desk, that it's not a difficult choice, right? Every hiring manager Googles their prospective candidates, right? What are they going to see when they Google you? And that's what you really want to focus on in my experience. There's lots of ways of doing that, contributing to open source projects, again, blogging, making videos. There's sky's the limit, but become an expert to the extent you can in some aspect, because that is really what's going to differentiate you and help you land, not only land your first job, but also kind of go up the go up the ladder as you progress in your career.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jerry. It's been a pleasure having you on the episode. And for our listeners, sorry, go ahead.
The pleasure is all mine. I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And for our listeners, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Press all the buttons. All right, we'll see you next time.